Episode 491. How Arrogant. Denora and the head of the Flake family were just walking out of the house.
Don't worry about the Miller family's affairs for the time being. Recently, the IT industry has regarded its projects highly.
The head of the Flake family squinted. Denora was humiliated at the previous news conference. When she heard that, she was indignant, but she didn't dare to say anything. She could only appear dissatisfied. As the two of them talked, a chaotic scene appeared in the front yard. Suddenly, a faint alarm was sounded.
What's going on?
The head of the Flake family frowned and turned to look at the butler. Since the incident suddenly happened, the butler didn't receive any updates.
I think there was an incident on the school grounds.
The head of the Flake family frowned and walked forward. Considering the present situation, few people dared to provoke the Flake family. After Joshua's death, there was a state of disunity, and it was unlikely that anyone would dare to act recklessly in the Flake family's territory. The few of them didn't mind it and didn't think that anything bad had happened. They walked along the corridor and went to the school grounds at the entrance of the Flake family's home. It was still nighttime. When the head of the Flake family and Denora arrived, several tall lamps on the campus suddenly lit up. They shone mercilessly on a group of ruthless guards. Denora saw Bessy standing in front of everyone with her hands across her chest and guessed what happened. When she heard that someone was there, she looked up coldly with an expression that could eat a person up. If you don't want to die, ask Sherry to come out. Bessy was the most recent newcomer in Evanston. Even the head of the Flake family had heard of her. Hearing that, the head of the Flake family paused and wondered if he had heard her wrongly.
Bessy, can you say that again?
Now, the Clark family had fallen from grace. Bessy and Michael's influence in Evanston had reduced by half. Only the new emergence of the World Poker Tour was helping them. She didn't say anything. Lynn immediately raised his hand and the guards took out their weapons. If you don't want to die, ask Sherry to come out. Beep. At the same time, dozens of countdown timers in the Flake family's house rang simultaneously. The head of the Flake family wasn't an ignorant person. Hearing those noises and seeing Bessy's commanding expression, he knew that she wasn't joking.
Ask Miss Flake to come over.
The head of the Flake family did not dare to provoke Bessy. He took a step back and instructed his butler. He immediately went to notify Sherry. Although there was a patriarch in the Flake family, everyone knew that Sherry was the one making the decisions. Soon, Sherry appeared. She had just ended a call with Jonas and was a little depressed about Bessy. When she saw Bessy, she squinted her eyes. The people around Bessy were very unfamiliar to her. Sherry could tell that Bessy was hostile. However, she remained calm and smiled elegantly.
Miss Miller.
Are you involved in what happened to Mr. White? Bessy stared at her coldly. It was an interrogative question. Sherry paused. It didn't seem like she had received the news regarding Mr. White's death. She frowned at Bessy. What do you mean? Nothing much. Bessy turned to look at Lynn. Take her and the head of the Flake family away. Sherry was usually a scheming person, but now she couldn't do anything. She was no match for Lynn.
What are you trying to do, Bessy?
The head of the Flake family was startled. He didn't expect her to kidnap Sherry. He didn't expect Bessy to be so brave. She even dared to be arrogant. Wasn't she afraid of death? It's a justified detention. Bessy glanced at the head of the Flake family and turned away. Seize them. Before the guards of the Flake family could get close to Bessy, they were already pushed aside by Lynn and the others. It's okay, Dad, Sherry said nonchalantly. It'll be fine. They won't dare to touch me. Hearing that, the head of the Flake family calmed down a little. Bessy and her troops left as quickly as they came. When Alexander and another group arrived, Bessy had just left, and only defeated soldiers remained at the Flake family's house. Alexander was a little dumbfounded. He turned to look at Christopher, who had just rushed over. Now he understood why Michael wasn't worried at all.
Christopher. Clark?
Christopher also slowly breathed a sigh of relief. He frowned and thought about it.
Miss Miller will probably return to the villa. Let's go.
In addition to an apartment near Northwestern University, Michael also had a suburban villa. Alexander nodded. The cars Bessy and her group left in were not far away. He paused for a moment and looked at Marvin.
Don't you think Miss Miller is being a bit arrogant?
Even he didn't dare to kidnap people in plain sight. Besides, he was a law-abiding citizen. Christopher did not respond. However, Marvin was calm. He glanced at Alexander and stepped on the gas. At the villa, Lynn and his guards appeared very vicious, and the head of the Flake family was quite worried. Lynn and the others didn't handcuff him, so he took out his phone and made a secret phone call. Lynn snatched his phone and said,
Miss Miller.
Bessy got out of the car and glanced at the head of the Flake family. Let him make the call. Lynn wasn't surprised at her instructions and threw the phone back to him. Seeing that Bessy was letting him make the call, he didn't waste time and immediately made the call.
Bessy.
After the person on the other end received the call, he initially recorded the information since it was relevant to the Flake family. However, when he searched for Bessy on the internet, he paused for a moment. Episode 492. This is Giant Crocodile's number. The recipient looked at the information on the computer screen. He took a deep breath.
Mr. Flake, Miss Miller is not detaining you illegally. I'm sorry. You can look for the criminal investigation team instead.
The person on the other side of the call hung up. The head of the Flake family was particularly anxious during the journey. At this time, he could no longer bear it anymore.
Sherry, will we be fine?
He looked at Sherry. Sherry had a good temperament. She was still moving elegantly as usual and did not appear to be worried at all. She only smiled and said, Don't worry, Dad. Lock them in the underground dungeon, Bessy commanded while ignoring the conversation between the two. Lynn couldn't do this because this was Michael's territory. Christopher quickly stepped forward and said,
Just bring them down for an interrogation.
He was filled with doubts about this situation. Since Bessy brought Sherry back, Christopher was naturally not going to be a bystander.
Miss Miller, do you have any other instructions?
Lynn looked around and bowed to her. Bessy shook her head and said, Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Lynn took 2 steps back.
This isn't much. If you have any other instructions, just tell me. Our boss is still drinking tea and specifically told me to follow you.
He was referring to Jared. I don't need your help anymore, so you can leave after you're done. Bessy nodded.
Okay, if you need anything, just contact the boss.
With a wave of his hand, Lynn dispersed the guards.
The other group of guards will remain outside the hospital.
Bessy looked at Christopher. You can interrogate them first. I will visit the hospital now. In the hospital, many of the White family members in Evanston also came over.
Michael.
Seeing Michael, Norman bowed his head. Michael looked at Principal White, closed his eyes and took a deep breath.
Come with me,
he said to Norman. There were many people in the hospital corridor. Michael walked to the end of the corridor with a cigarette in his hand. He leaned his thin body against the wall and stared at the person in front of him deeply.
Norman, why didn't you tell Miss Miller about such a serious thing in advance? How can you not even reveal a thing? I'm sure you and Mr. White are aware of her personality.
The White family members kept hiding things from Bessy. When Bertha died, Michael could feel how heartbroken Bessy was, and now the same thing happened to Principal White. Michael frowned. He didn't want to imagine how much guilt Bessy felt. His voice brought Norman to his senses. He shook his head and smiled bitterly.
I couldn't hide this from you in the end. Mr. White was selfish.
Michael understood his intentions and looked at Norman. Norman immediately knelt in front of Michael.
Michael, you should know that the White family could only get on this level because of the Research Institute.
Michael only recently realized this, so he didn't pay much attention to the Research Institute previously. The information he received was brought back by Bessy from the Research Institute. After hearing what Norman said, Michael thought of a possibility and continued pursing his lips.
Claudius was the first person in charge of the Research Institute. He had many secrets and was being threatened by someone. At that time, the White family didn't help him because of the Research Institute. Only the Miller family helped him. Claudius and the patriarch of the Miller family were like brothers and extraordinarily talented individuals, but they didn't have good outcomes.
Norman kowtowed and said,
Mr. White. Mr. White felt guilty and wanted to make it up to him by helping Miss Miller, seeing that Miss Miller is a part of the Research Institute. His last wish was fulfilled.
Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't say anything. Norman kowtowed again.
At the start, in Chicago, Mr. White looked for Miss Miller, but she did not agree. After thinking about it, he only dared to look for Professor Wilson when he was dying. This time, Mr. White knew about what the White family did in the past and would rather die than go to the hospital. In the end, the other butlers and I begged him to go.
The White family rose up because they took advantage of the Wilson family's demise. Besides, Mr. White didn't know what else to do. This was his death wish. Would he tell this story to Bessy? Neither Mr. White nor Norman had the guts to do so. They were too ashamed. The White family stepped on the Wilson family to get ahead and did not dare to show up even when Claudius was being threatened. Mr. White wanted to apologize to Claudius and Bertha the most, but they had already passed away. Michael watched as Norman kneeled. He didn't say anything as he stared at the end of the corridor. After a long time, he finally said,
"Get up."
Norman stumbled as he got up. He subconsciously glanced at him. Opposite him, the elevator doors slowly closed. Norman did not clearly see the person in the elevator. At the villa, Alexander sat at the doorway. When he saw Bessy and Marvin, he couldn't help but look up in surprise.
"Miss Miller, why are you back so soon?"
Bessy seemed to be colder than before. She gave him an icy look. "Have you managed to get answers from them?"
"Harvey is here too. There's no progress at the moment. I will take you down,"
Alexander said as he escorted her underground.
"They're very stubborn."
When Christopher and Harvey saw that Bessy was here, they walked out to greet her. They frequently turned to look at Sherry behind the glass wall and frowned. Harvey looked at Bessy.
"Furthermore, there are too many people backing her, so she's not easy to mess with. I've heard some news that Giant Crocodile and his men have arrived in Evanston."
"Really?" Bessy mumbled. She nodded and pushed open the glass door.
"Miss Miller."
Christopher and Harvey quickly followed her. Bessy looked at Sherry. "How did you interrogate Mr. White? Break 10 of his fingers?" She nodded to the people near her, who were also Michael's confidants. "Bessy, how dare you?" Sherry stopped playing with her phone, and her expression changed. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Bessy slowly leaned over the table and stared at her coldly. "Do you want to say that you have people backing you? Who are they? The Flake family? Jonas? Do they dare to stir things up in Evanston? Let me think. 129 as well, right?" Bessy lowered her head and looked at the official page of 129 on Sherry's phone. She stretched out her hand and pressed a series of numbers one by one. "This is Giant Crocodile's number. I've given it to you." Episode 493. You've let the cat out of the bag. Harvey and Christopher also followed Bessy in. After hearing what she said, the two of them looked at each other. Giant Crocodile? This person was a force in Evanston and a hot topic recently. Bessy wanted to call Giant Crocodile. Even Alexander, who was focused on Sherry, was stunned for a moment. His mouth was agape as he silently looked at Marvin in surprise. It was as if he wanted to ask, what sort of force was Miss Miller? It was impossible for her to lie. Sherry investigated Bessy's background more than once. However, she couldn't find much information. There was a lot of news related to Bessy on the internet, but most of the rumors were deleted. At this moment, after seeing the number Bessy entered on her phone, Sherry paused before looking up at her. "Do you think I will believe you based on what you said?" Did she think she wasn't aware of who Giant Crocodile was? Not only was he a senior member of 129, but he also had a huge holding in Austria. He was involved in many shady businesses and had partnered with many forces. At this moment, the situation in the capital was unstable, and the 4 major families were on the verge of crisis. In normal circumstances, they wouldn't have let dangerous individuals like Giant Crocodile enter the capital. Sherry had tried many methods, but until now, she was still unable to contact him. She refused to believe any of Bessy's words. However, Giant Crocodile only arrived today, yet Bessy was aware of this news. She also knew that she was looking for him. Sherry lowered her head. Her fingers were slightly tensed. In reality, Sherry was calm on the surface, but she was panicking inside. Bessy was especially calm today. She squinted slightly. "You'll find out soon if it's fake. Let's see if anyone will come to save you today. I'm waiting for Jonas and your backing forces. I won't turn off your phone." Bessy looked at her calmly, as if she was looking at a dead person. "I'm waiting to see if you can get out and whether I will die before you." Bam. Bessy threw Sherry's phone on the table. After that, she turned around and left. When she threw the phone, she also pressed the call button.
"Hello?"
The other party's voice was low, and he sounded a little cold. In the dark room, Christopher, Alexander, Harvey, Sherry, and the head of the Flake family were present. At this time, everyone was thinking about the same thing. Was this really Giant Crocodile? Sherry pursed her lips and did not say anything. However, Christopher walked forward and bravely asked,
"Hello? I don't have money, am not looking for a house, and already have car insurance. Currently, I'm not short of parking spaces. I'm not looking to invest. If you want investments, look for Slag Dragon."
"He needs airplanes and rockets. If there's nothing, I'm hanging up." The voice on the other end was distant. "Why did I receive a marketing call just after I arrived in Evanston? When was my number sold to telemarketers?" After that, he hung up the phone. He spoke quickly and a little viciously. The call didn't even last for a minute. The dark room was extremely quiet. He mentioned Slag Dragon. Bessy couldn't have asked someone to impersonate him, right? Initially, Sherry was still confident, but now her face was pale. After Christopher and the others left, the head of the Flake family finally looked at her.
"Sherry, was that really Giant Crocodile?"
Sherry clenched her phone tightly and did not make a sound.
"Sherry, if Bessy wants to know something, just tell her."
The head of the Flake family also turned pale.
"It's not good to provoke Giant Crocodile. No wonder the criminal investigation team doesn't dare to interfere."
"Shut up! How can it be him?" Sherry spat. At this time, at Jared's side, Giant Crocodile was sitting on the sofa. He turned off his phone, threw it aside, and drank half a can of beer. Jared glanced at him.
"Telemarketer?"
Giant Crocodile said indifferently.
"I don't know."
He treated unknown calls as telemarketers. This was because Slag Dragon had tricked him many times. Giant Crocodile had also asked Bessy to fix his phone software.
"How's the situation on Lone Wolf's side?"
As Bessy did not come, Jared didn't take them to the entertainment venues like underground bars on Black Street, so he only opened a case of beer at his own house.
"Does she need help?" I'm not sure about her current situation, but Lynn has already left.
Giant Crocodile casually said as he took another sip of beer. Looking at Clarissa in front of him, he said,
You seem to have something on your mind. I remember that your family is not caught in the war in the capital, right?
It's nothing. Clarissa leaned on the sofa and looked at him. I'm thinking about the divorce. Cough. Cough. Once she said that, Giant Crocodile and Jared were shocked. After some time, Jared wiped his mouth with a tissue paper and looked at Clarissa deeply.
You are married?
When did this bewildering secret take place?
Why didn't you tell us?
Giant Crocodile put down his beer and looked at Clarissa in shock. It's a marriage of agreement. I had my reasons, but the time is coming. Clarissa squashed her can and glanced at the two of them. Don't get so excited.
Okay.
Jared nodded. He pretended to lower his head and drink his beer, but he couldn't help but glance in Clarissa's direction. What the hell? Clarissa finished her beer and threw the bottle at Jared. What are you looking at? She couldn't be bothered to deal with these two. Suddenly, she thought of something, sat up straight, and sent a message to Bessy. Austria's boxing ring. You've let the cat out of the bag. Episode 494. Meet her personally? After sending the message, Clarissa got another can of beer. She opened the can with one hand and drank it while reading her messages. Of the 5 senior members of 129, Clarissa was an alcoholic. Santiago had asked her something on Twitter, but she ignored the message. She was waiting for Bessy's call. As she guessed, in less than 2 minutes, Clarissa's cell phone rang. It was Bessy. Clarissa picked it up. She was about to lean back on the couch, but as if remembering something, she got up and walked to the balcony. Then shut the door behind her. Clarissa. On the other end, Bessy was in the room that Marvin had prepared for her. The lights weren't on, and Bessy was standing by the full-length window, watching Michael's car pull into the driveway. Clarissa was just 6 years older than Bessy. Under Clarissa's insistence, Bessy addressed her as Clarissa. I didn't get much information, Clarissa said, sitting on the balcony. But because it involved you, I decided to check out Austria's underground alliance. Upon hearing that, Bessy knew that the information Clarissa got was definitely right. After a short while of silence, she nodded. That's right. Then I checked it right. Clarissa smiled. Bessy, be more careful. You've got to erase your traces more thoroughly in the future. I really didn't expect this. There are traces? Bessy knitted her eyebrows together. Clarissa shook her head. I'm not too sure, but your confidant is probably still in there. Bessy went quiet. Clarissa waited for a while but did not hear a response. She didn't want to probe further. Bessy was involved in a lot of different matters and Clarissa wasn't keen on checking out all about it. All right then. But I want to remind you that whatever has been happening in Evanston might be to target you. I know. Bessy looked downstairs. Michael was on the phone too. It seemed as if he could sense someone was looking at him, so he looked up and saw that she was peering down at him. He hung up and headed upstairs. That's all that matters. Clarissa knew that Bessy always had her own perspective and opinions. Just wanted to remind you that you can entrust Giant Crocodile with whatever has been going on in Evanston. Boss Jared has contacted you, right? Mm-hmm. Bessy nodded. They went on for a bit more and then ended the call. Just as Bessy hung up, she heard 3 knocks on the door. Bessy didn't turn around. She stayed standing by the window and said, It's not locked. Michael opened the door after he heard her response. You heard all that Norman said? He stood beside her with the lights still turned off and looked at her with the dim light from the outside. Bessy nodded silently. She barely had an expression. Initially, she was only acting according to Bertha's instructions. That was why she rejected Principal White. But over the years, Principal White was only second to Mr. Grint to her. Mr. White was rather important to Bessy. Until today, Bessy found it hard to believe that the person who had sworn to protect her and Michael was lying coldly on the bed now.
Mr. White is like that.
Michael sighed and pulled her in for an embrace, and then looked out at the night lights.
From the moment he decided to make you the only successor, you should have known how proud he was as a person. He found the truth about your grandpa leaving Evanston back then. He's gone to look for your grandpa and grandma now.
That was all Mr. White could do, having found out how the White family made it big. I can't really forgive him for not saying anything. Bessy hadn't cried when she found out that Mr. White passed away, but now she couldn't hold it in any longer. She smiled sadly and said, "I can't forgive myself either." If she hadn't been so focused on the Miller family's matters, if she hadn't been so focused on finding out why her grandfather had passed away, she surely would have found something amiss about the White family. At least she could have stopped Principal White.
You couldn't have stopped him.
Michael released her and placed both his hands on her shoulders. He looked down at her and said very seriously,
Mr. White was so proud. Didn't you know that? He already didn't like the way Director Fielder did things, and the White family went even more overboard than he did. Mr. White's death was a form of apology and a statement, a liberation to him. He's different from your grandma. Back then, your grandma had been worried about leaving you behind.
Michael left one more thing unsaid. Mr. White's death, besides being an apology, was also a way to agitate Bessy, and obviously, he'd achieved it. Michael looked out the door deeply. Had he known how scheming Mr. White was, he wouldn't have allowed Bessy to be his apprentice. News of Mr. White's passing got around very quickly. The funeral was organized by Kenneth and Norman. First, it had been Joshua, and now it was Mr. White. This reminded them of what had happened decades back. At that time, the Miller family had gone down because their patriarch had died suddenly, and they couldn't find the underlying cause. That was how the Flake family caught up with them. Mr. White's death was another warning to the people in Evanston. At the same time, inside an office in the economic center of Evanston, a man clad in black knocked on the door and entered, saying politely,
Miss Flake is what?
Jonas turned around slightly and turned to face the man. The man in black put one knee on the ground.
Miss Flake is being held by Bessy. It's been 2 days and we couldn't find them. It's like they've vanished.
Bessy? Jonas put his teacup down and furrowed his brows.
I've underestimated her?
The man in black did not dare to respond. Jonas suddenly grinned.
All right, I'll go down personally. Let's see what's so good about her. You want to go down personally? She's just a sinner of the Miller family. There's no need at all.
Episode 495. A meeting between Bessy and Jonas. In Jonas's eyes, the four most powerful families in Evanston weren't the least bit threatening. That was why Sherry wasn't worried at all that day.
It's fine. I just want to see what that son of mine is up to.
He chuckled coldly. Since it seemed like Jonas had made up his mind, the man in black did not say more. The following day at the White household, a few senior members of the White family sighed as they looked at Kenneth.
Kenneth, you really shouldn't have returned.
A huge part of the White family had taken off to Austria. Only the moderate forces of the family had stayed behind. This was a huge blow to the White family. Kenneth was kneeling before the tablet quietly.
Senior members, we'll have to trouble you in time to come.
Norman said to them,
A lot of people have their eyes on us now that Mr. White has passed on. We need to be especially conscientious about the funeral, so nobody takes advantage of the situation.
Especially those like the Flake family. Many of them were looking to trample all over the White family now. This was the largest threat in the history of their family. Everyone was concerned.
Miss Miller.
There was a unanimous greeting outside, just as they were talking. Norman and the rest quieted down immediately and turned to face the door. They heard some footsteps. Bessy entered first, followed by a young man.
Miss Miller, this is...
Mr. White's brother saw that it wasn't Marvin, but the man they met in the hospital the previous night. Lynn O'Malley. Bessy introduced him. From today onward, he'll be responsible for the safety and security of the White family. Norman, you can instruct him directly.
Norman.
Lynn went forward and shook his hand.
Just treat us as bodyguards.
With that, he waved his hand and in came a group of young men in black. All of them had a white flower clipped to their shirts. They lined up orderly in 2 rows. They looked like the special forces that were trained stringently. Bessy walked past Norman and knelt on the other side of the casket to pay her respects.
Norman, these people...
One of the senior members turned to ask him.
Who are they? They don't seem to be ordinary men.
I'm not sure either. Norman paused for a moment.
They seem to be Miss Miller's friends.
Bessy did not introduce them one by one. She only mentioned Lynn's name, Lynn O'Malley. This was an unfamiliar name to Norman and the other senior members. Bessy spent 2 hours in the White household. Kenneth hadn't really been in a good state of mind the past couple of days, so Bessy helped him with some miscellaneous matters before she left. Marvin was waiting for her in the car. Before Bessy even got to the parking garage, a man in black stopped her.
Miss Miller, our boss would like to speak to you.
Scram. Bessy's voice was extremely cold. She hadn't slept well in days and was more easily angered than usual. When she looked up, it appeared as if there were knives in her eyes pointed right at him. The man instinctively took a step back. He wasn't expecting this sort of reaction from her. Bessy walked right past him. The man seemed to take a second to recover before he said,
Our boss is Mr. Jonas Klein.
Bessy instantly stopped in her tracks and looked up. 10 minutes later, Bessy arrived at a restaurant a few streets down. The restaurant was beautifully furnished, but extremely quiet. Marvin parked the car and asked casually,
Miss Miller, you're here to meet a friend?
Bessy nodded. Marvin was pretty curious. He stopped the car first so she could get out, but did not park the car immediately. He looked into the restaurant from the outside. He saw a middle-aged man sitting by the window. Marvin straightened up and messaged Michael. He then quickly parked the car and then hurried in. Bessy had only just taken a seat when Marvin appeared in the restaurant. Bessy took off her jacket and noticed the man sitting by the window. She walked over right away and sat opposite him. You're looking for me? Bessy leaned back in the chair and looked at him. Jonas had been sizing her up from the moment she entered. She sat casually and wasn't the least bit elegant. Sensing that she was acting like a gangster, he furrowed his brows slightly.
You're Bessy Miller?
Bessy was getting impatient. Her voice was cold and curt. Cut the crap. She rubbed her temple. This symptom hadn't hit her in a while.
It was you who got people to capture Sherry?
Jonas took a sip of his coffee and asked calmly. He turned to look at Marvin. Marvin seemed too polite to Bessy. Bessy had already guessed that Jonas was looking for her because of this, so she wasn't surprised at all. But when he brought this up, her expression went cold, as if a thin sheet of ice masked her face.
I already sent my men to Michael's place. In about 2 hours, Sherry will be rescued in perfect condition. Even if you know that she has something to do with Mr. White's death, you wouldn't dare to touch her.
Jonas smiled at her. Bessy showed no reaction to what he said, but Marvin got angry. Jonas couldn't help but smirk when he saw Marvin's expression.
Why get angry? Shouldn't you have seen this coming?
Marvin turned towards Bessy.
Miss Miller, you...
He expected Bessy to get upset, but she ended up smiling. She placed a hand on the table and said, Mr. Klein, I guess you haven't received the news yet. You don't know where Sherry is right now. Episode 496. Confrontation. Jonas was shocked. He looked at the ceramic cup and then up at Bessy as his smile faded. What Bessy meant was, the workspace of the 129 members? Hadn't they been keeping out of the others' matters for a while now?
What's the situation with the Flake family now?
Jonas pursed his lips. He felt a little uncertain now. He knew quite a bit about Bessy and Michael, and he had contacts with the World Poker Tour and academia in Austria. Without Jonas having to instruct him, his trusted aide already began attempting to contact Sherry. Just the previous day, Sherry had been so sure that Bessy wouldn't dare to touch her. That was why she hadn't contacted Jonas immediately. Moreover, she never liked Bessy, so it felt like an ultimate humiliation for her to reach out for help. She only started contacting people when she felt like something was going wrong. Jonas's trusted aide had a strange expression after hanging up. Jonas noticed it and asked,
Something's gone wrong?
He looked up, seemingly a little startled.
Miss Flake is suspected of being involved in a murder case. She's being held by the investigators.
Bessy wasn't the least bit surprised to hear this response. She got up right away. She held up the coffee that she hadn't touched before this and raised it before Jonas. After taking a sip, she said coldly, "Thank you for hosting me." With that, she placed the coffee cup back on the table. There was still half a cup of coffee left in the white porcelain cup. The aroma of the coffee was still rather thick and rich. Bessy was only respectful to a few select people such as Zeke, Bertha, and a few teachers. Fewer and fewer people seemed to gain her respect, and she was used to getting her way. Jonas tried to apply pressure on her with his attitude, but it was obviously the wrong choice. "Let's go." Bessy glanced at Marvin and left. Her windbreaker fluttered in the wind. Her expression was cold, her movements clean. Marvin was a little stunned by the situation, but followed her out instinctively. The restaurant had been reserved by Jonas, so there were no other customers around. Now, the atmosphere only got colder. 4 of Jonas's men were standing at the door, with 2 on each side. Bessy was about to exit when she saw Michael enter with an oddly cool aura around him. She stopped in her tracks for a moment and looked up at him.
"Wait for me in the car."
His eyes were cold, but they softened slightly when he looked at her. "You're going in?" Bessy asked. Michael simply said,
"Give me 2 minutes.
"Sure."
"This is Sherry's intention. I went to Harvey's just now."
Michael handed the confidential file to her.
"Take a look while you are waiting. I'll be right back."
Bessy nodded and waved at him casually. In the seat by the window, Jonas's expression was sullen. He didn't seem surprised to see Michael. He looked at him as if in deep thought.
"What's the rush? It seems like this Bessy girl has a pretty huge influence on you."
Jonas smiled. Every person had his weakness.
"Don't look for her in the future."
Michael did not take a seat, nor did he bother thinking any more about what Jonas was saying. He looked down at him condescendingly.
"Then you've got to guard yourself against me."
Jonas smiled and then narrowed his eyes.
"What did you do to Sherry? Son, I really underestimated you, but..."
Jonas took a cigarette out as he went on.
"The both of you are rather well known, but that girl thinks too highly of herself. Do you think I'll let her leave today?"
Michael had this weakness that he could exploit. It would be silly not to grab hold of it. Jonas glanced at his trusted aide. His aide quickly nodded and tapped on his Bluetooth earpiece, saying,
"Catch her."
Jonas's men were right at the door. Jonas lit his cigarette. He then turned to Michael and smiled, but he realized that Michael didn't seem worried or flustered at all. Instead, he was calmly looking out the door. Jonas was a little stunned. This wasn't the reaction he was expecting. He followed Michael's gaze towards the door. Not far away, Bessy and Marvin were walking out the door. Her cell phone rang in her pocket and she picked it up. It was from Clarissa. The four men were standing by. Without Jonas's permission, they couldn't let Bessy leave. They stuck their arms out to block her. Bessy looked up and saw the four men. She smiled and asked, "Are you sure you want to stop me?" The men didn't make way.
"Miss Miller, please stay behind."
Bessy nodded. She said to Clarissa, "Give me a minute." Meanwhile, Clarissa raised a brow on the other side. "Are you all right?" "Yeah," Bessy said calmly. "All right." "Then take care of what you need to first." She didn't hang up. Bessy looked up and tossed the cell phone to Marvin. Marvin caught it with much understanding and took 2 steps to the side. Episode 497, International Prison. The cafe was quite big. The doorway was also wide. Bessy buttoned her windbreaker and then calmly looked at the 4 people in front of her. She kept her nonchalant expression and then raised her hand. "Let's go." After a minute, 4 booms were heard. Jonas's 4 bodyguards were all lying on the ground. Bessy looked down and lowered her sleeves bit by bit. The light glow of the morning sun shone on her delicate face, making the cold aura exuding from her even more shocking.
"Miss Miller."
Marvin walked over calmly and gave the phone back to her. While answering it, Bessy walked to the corner of the street to talk to Clarissa. Marvin stopped in place and looked down blankly at the knocked-out bodyguards. He shook his head in admiration. Inside the restaurant, Michael looked at Jonas and said lightly,
"Haven't you received the news yet? You want to keep her here with 4 bodyguards?"
Michael pointed a finger at him.
"Don't touch her."
He finished this sentence lightly and then turned to leave. Behind him, Jonas's face darkened little by little.
"Sir, Bessy is a little weird."
His confidant glanced at the 4 people lying outside. They had brought capable men on this trip to Evanston, and he himself couldn't even defeat them. But Bessy had defeated them so easily. His confidant's expression kept changing. Not to mention him, even Jonas narrowed his eyes.
"Help me contact Miss Schuler first."
Inside the car, Bessy sat in the passenger seat talking to Clarissa on the phone and flipping through the information Michael gave her. "I'm going to put Sherry at your side," she said calmly. Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" This little girl was a little cruel. Bessy said lightly, "Yes. Okay, I'll send you an official letter later. By the way, I'm keeping an eye on Chicago." Clarissa laughed. "It hasn't been very peaceful lately. I've been keeping an eye on the West family as you requested, but it's better to do it in Evanston. Chicago is too far and beyond my influence." Bessy flipped through the file and paused. "I'll think about it." Susan was easy to settle, but as for Andrea, she wasn't sure if she would come to Evanston. After hanging up the phone, Bessy thought about it more and continued flipping through the documents. No one had come to find Sherry after Bessy had left that night. Feeling uneasy, Sherry had already confessed to Principal White's affairs. Things were no different than what Norman said. It was indeed Sherry who had told Principal White the truth behind the incident back then. She obviously knew much more than Principal White. Claudius had been considered a prodigy back then and had researched several patented technologies on the crater. He had relied on these to make a connection between Evanston and Austria. However, several forces had been working behind his back. Director Fielder was tempted by one of Claudius's experiments and exposed his body to radiation. None of the White family had come to lend a helping hand when Claudius was forced out. Everyone kicks a man who is down. They all wanted to obtain the results of Claudius's research, but even if he finally withdrew from Evanston, they could only obtain the semi-finished product of the third underground floor of the laboratory. Bessy could guess what followed later. Claudius and Bertha had returned to Fairfield to remain anonymous, but that didn't mean they had stopped researching. Later on, in the huge explosion in Fairfield's laboratory, several researchers had died. This incident involved countless lives and was indeed linked to the White family. Bessy read the information without any changes in her expression. Having already heard about it from Norman, she wasn't shocked to read these words now. She couldn't say that the White family had been in the wrong. After all, it would have been helpless even if they had reached out to help. It was also true that Principal White was paving the way for her. She closed her eyes. She never expected Principal White to have such an extreme character. He would rather die than tell her the truth. The car stopped at the brigade where Harvey was. Michael got out of the car and walked to the passenger seat.
Get out first. How's the White family?
Bessy kept the documents. I sent someone to the White family's house. I should be able to calm the atmosphere.
That's good.
Michael nodded and headed inside with her.
What about your aunt?
He had heard her conversation with Clarissa in the car. I'll ask her. Bessy's expression was cold and calm. If not, I'll go back to find her myself. She would be on edge if Andrea didn't come to Evanston. Is Rosemary all right? Bessy asked about her instead. She remembered that the Clark family was preparing to elect the next patriarch. In the face of Mr. White's affairs, the Clark family would have to put their plans on halt temporarily. After all, people in Evanston now knew that without unity, the 4 major families would only be a thing of the past.
We'll see.
Michael shook his head and went straight into the office. Christopher and Harvey were already there.
Boss, Miss Miller.
When they saw Bessy and Michael come in the middle of their meeting, they quickly stood up and immediately became restrained.
Trouble?
Michael glanced at them. Harvey shook his head and closed the document in his hands.
The wanted order can't be executed. The domestic.
He frowned. With Jonas's oppression, even if Sherry was temporarily detained, the situation in Evanston was still extremely chaotic. Bessy sat down across from him and looked up. No, I have somewhere else to go. Episode 498. The Warrant. Bessy looked down at her phone. Clarissa had yet to send the official letter. It would take time for her to mobilize the official letter and manpower.
Where?
Harvey was taken aback. Without receiving the news, Bessy didn't reply to him immediately and shook her head. I'll wait a little longer. Take me to see Sherry first. Harvey turned around and ordered someone to bring her to Sherry. He and his subordinates finally heaved a sigh of relief when Bessy left.
Michael, do you have any clue about Mr. White's death? I always felt that other forces are involved.
Harvey turned to Michael.
Are you going back to the team this time?
Yeah. Michael lowered his head and flipped through the documents. He tapped his fingers on the table, looking extremely solemn and serious. Sherry wouldn't have been restrained so quickly without Michael. Michael had been the one to find most of the information about Sherry and her international crimes. There was really no way of detaining her domestically. They didn't have evidence about Mr. White either.
We'll see what she says first.
Michael closed the file. Harvey nodded and brought him to where Sherry was detained. Bessy was now talking to her inside. Through the surveillance room, they could clearly hear their conversation. Inside, Sherry's face had collapsed, but she still maintained an elegant sitting posture. Upon seeing Bessy, she smiled, seemingly quite happy. I didn't expect Mr. White's death. Bessy stared at her with dark eyes. I've already told you what I know. After the initial panic, Sherry finally maintained her composure. She closed her eyes and said lightly, You can sue me. Of course, you can hit me too. But there are surveillance cameras here.
Boss.
Christopher put down his file and said thoughtfully,
Sherry might be indirectly connected to Mr. White's death, but there might be someone else behind it. That's why she's not afraid and has laid it all out on the table for us. This woman!
Harvey's subordinate banged the table abruptly and gritted his teeth.
She clearly knows that she won't get into much trouble. The most she'll suffer is a damaged reputation.
She would only be detained for a period of time as a suspect. As for her other crimes, they couldn't be dealt with domestically. This was exactly why Harvey had said that they had nothing on her. How could someone like Sherry not leave an escape route for herself? Even if she was imprisoned, Jonas would still use his forces to rescue her, seeing how much he valued her.
Actually, there's something we could do.
Harvey seemed to have thought of something. Christopher turned to him and shook his head.
You mean the international maximum security prison on the border? That place is full of wicked people. Terry went over to trade with Giant Crocodile and couldn't even pass the gates.
Everyone present had heard of that place. No prisoner had escaped for 28 years. No one really knew the history of this international maximum security prison, and it remained particularly mysterious. Michael nodded slightly and took out his phone. He tapped on it and called Terry. Christopher turned to Harvey and said,
Please delete the surveillance later.
Everyone in the room, including Christopher, felt like Bessy would really hit Sherry. Bessy was always so impatient. Harvey nodded, but when they turned back to the surveillance room, Bessy hadn't made a single move. She just patted her arms, asked what she wanted to know, and left the interrogation room. Everyone exchanged glances. Michael went outside with the file. He saw Bessy coming out from the opposite room.
Miss Miller, it's not worth it to be angry with people like her.
Christopher glanced at her and comforted her, apprehensively. Bessy checked her phone for any news and shook her head. I'm not angry. I'm going to the White family's house now. Although a few hackers were still unknown, she still wanted to personally inform Kenneth about Mr. White's cause of death. There were also Andrea's affairs. Under this circumstance, she didn't know what was going on in Chicago. She would only rest assured once Andrea and Pete were in Evanston. The next day, Michael parked the car at the White family's gates. Mr. White's funeral was being held that day, and many people were there. Bessy got out of the car and stopped in front of the gates. Michael stood with her. After a long while, her phone finally rang. She looked down to see a new message from Clarissa. Pausing for a moment, she clicked on it and saw the official notice. She opened her contacts and clicked on Harvey's phone number. Now.
Miss Miller?
Harvey was a little taken aback. Bessy said lightly, Send Sherry to the international prison. Harvey paused for a moment and smiled bitterly.
Miss Miller, we can detain her, but...
I have an official letter. Bessy looked up at the soft light shining above her. I'll send it to you. She hung up. Then, she sent him the official letter from Clarissa. After sending the message, she put her phone away and walked into the White family's house. On the other end of the phone, Harvey was still sitting at his desk. He waved at his subordinates to put down the files first and then clicked on Bessy's message. It was an official letter. Warrant, 2019 public arrest, number 196. This is an official order. International Maximum Security Prison. Clarissa. Episode 499. The End. Harvey was feeling helpless about Sherry's situation. Evanston and America were now biased towards Sherry's situation, and all the rules wouldn't hurt her at all. Michael and Bessy had both used their connections, but the situation and policies still stood in the way. Even Harvey was helpless.
Captain, I'm going to mobilize the information.
Harvey's subordinate put down the files and looked at him.
I want to head over to where Mr. Clark is.
However, Harvey was motionless.
Captain?
He called again. Looking up abruptly, Harvey remained silent but called Bessy. Bessy was already standing in front of the room where the wake was being held at this time. People came and went, and she stood in the midst of the crowd, quietly looking at the black and white pictures of Mr. White. There was a long silence before she finally answered Harvey's call. In the video call, Harvey's heart race quickened at the thought of the document he had just seen.
Miss Miller, what you just sent me, it's an arrest warrant from the prison?
Yeah. Bessy's eyes were still fixated on Mr. White's picture.
How did you manage to obtain it?
Harvey came from a military academy and was very well versed in the law. He knew that they had no connection to the prison. They only had connections internationally. All those locked up there were important international criminals. The copper and iron walls of the prison were impenetrable, and no one had escaped since its establishment 28 years ago. I'll tell you the details later. Bessy's eyes were cold. Someone will come to hand it over in about a day and a half. You can send a few people to follow them.
I understand.
Harvey nodded. He paused for a moment and continued.
Then, can our team sign a contract with them? It's usually too difficult to catch those cross-border fugitives.
Michael had been around to settle such matters previously, but now that he had retired from the criminal investigation team, it was getting increasingly difficult for Harvey. He didn't want to let go of this opportunity. I'll help you ask. Bessy replied lightly.
Thank you, Miss Miller.
Harvey immediately exclaimed. Bessy hung up. At the same time, Michael also received a message. He glanced at the content and paused before looking at her.
Kenneth, my condolences.
Not far away, people had come to mourn in endless streams. Kenneth had mentally collapsed for a few days, but his condition had stabilized now. After Samuel and Robert paid homage to Principal White, they took a step back and looked for Bessy and Michael in the crowd. They spotted them but didn't go forward to disturb Bessy. Samuel's mother was also there, but she didn't dare to look at the bodyguards surrounding the White family's house. What on earth does the White family do? Samuel's mother retracted her gaze and lowered her voice thoughtfully. She was asking Samuel. Many people in Evanston were familiar with Bessy and Samuel. Upon hearing their conversation, they all glanced over. Previously, everyone had thought that after Michael's downfall, his life would continue spiraling downwards, and many would come to suppress him. However, he was still alive and kicking. As for Bessy and the Miller family, not only were they alive and kicking, but James had immediately taken back the main control of the personnel. Eric's incident had occurred too suddenly. So many of the White family had turned their backs on each other. But today, the black-clad bodyguards standing in rows were terrifying. It was difficult to even find someone with such similar auras in the four major families. Samuel hadn't paid much attention to the four major families' affairs and was a little out of touch with Bessy. He shook his head speechlessly. On the contrary, Robert said thoughtfully, It doesn't look like Michael's subordinates. Maybe it's Miss Miller's friends. Robert had seen Christopher's men. The people in the manor now were too different. They exchanged a few words and then exchanged glances silently. Now, Evanston was becoming really interesting. Gabriel sat at his house instead of going to the funeral. He was no longer the first shareholder of the Miller family. Hence, he didn't dare to go to Mr. White's funeral. At this point, he was prancing around in his study, With his wits, he could estimate the situation in Evanston currently, and he already expected Sherry's demise. After all, Sherry had been the one to abet him, and had kept a lot of things from him.
Gabriel, don't be afraid of James and Bessy.
His subordinate glanced at him.
It's at such a time that you must express your sincerity to Miss Flake. If you avoid seeing them now, you're only giving up the opportunity to James and Bessy. The situation we finally won back has all been disrupted by them. How can Miss Flake trust you in the future?
Everyone was aware that without Sherry, Gabriel's branch of the family couldn't possibly overthrow the others.
Yes, sir.
His other subordinates sang the same tune. They all knew Sherry's identity. Never mind the Flake family. Sherry herself was extremely powerful. She even had connections from 1 to 9. Staring at them, Gabriel shook his head. The White family's incident was getting increasingly more complicated. He could also guess that Mr. White's accident must have something to do with Sherry. But he really didn't dare to go up against Bessy. Gabriel paused.
Wait for a little more. What are you waiting for? Asked one of his subordinates impatiently. You know who is behind Miss Flake. You know the White family's fate for offending her.
At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Gabriel glanced outside.
Come in.
It was his confidant.
Gabriel.
The confidant walked in and immediately knelt on one knee.
Miss Flake has just been arrested.
Episode 500, Revival of the Miller Family. As soon as he spoke, everyone in the room immediately paused. Even Gabriel was surprised. He pursed his lips and turned to the confidant.
Is the source of the information reliable?
Only the IT industry and a few families had noticed the last civil war in the Miller family. Most of Evanston's eyes were attracted by the Clark family. Most families only received information about James's bloodline and weren't clear about the specific process and commercial secrets. But Gabriel had been very interested. He was in this industry and knew better. The White family couldn't make the corporation and the insiders take action. Thus, he could only live in seclusion now and could no longer help Sherry.
I personally obtained the information from the brigade.
The confidant nodded and took a deep breath.
She has already boarded the plane at the military airport.
Gabriel wasn't surprised. He just turned around to his other subordinates.
Now do you know why I haven't gone to Miss Flake? With James and Bessy's pride, they won't possibly go to the White family or Rosemary for help.
They were both very prideful. This, be it the World Poker Tour or any other connections, would all belong to Bessy. Zeke didn't have such connections. Fighting with Bessy was like shooting yourself in the foot. His subordinates fell silent. They exchanged glances and someone in the middle said blankly,
What does Bessy have to do with them? Gabriel, you are the bloodline reviving. Maybe.
Looking out the window, Gabriel immediately thought of the patriarch of the Miller family.
After all, they're from the old man's direct bloodline. The Miller family might really be revived. Listen to me.
Gabriel was a decisive person and immediately looked up.
From today on, no one is to provoke the Miller family. I'll repair the relationship with them. As for the Flake family, we'll keep our distance from them. If Bessy is willing to give me a second chance, that would be even better.
At the financial center headquarters, Jonas was sitting in his office chair, smoking with his back to the door. 3 knocks sounded at the door. He flicked his cigarette.
Come in.
His confidant came in and told him about Sherry. The information about the prison was classified. Gabriel had only found out because he had kept a close eye on the Flake family. Such information naturally couldn't be hidden from Jonas. Jonas paused. He looked up fiercely.
The Supermax prison on the border?
The atmosphere in the office plummeted to the freezing point. His confidant knelt on the floor, not daring to look up.
Okay.
Jonas waved his hand and swept off the white porcelain cup on the table. The green tea inside poured all over his carpet.
Very good.
He turned his office chair around silently. After a long while, he took out his phone. He was calling the brigade to ask about Sherry. However, there was only a respectful reply to him.
Sorry, sir. She has already been transferred to the prison. We cannot give you any information.
Jonah's face sank. In the office, his confidant didn't even dare to breathe. Jonas hung up the phone fiercely and glanced at his confidant.
How's the situation now? You know about the Supermax prison. Nobody gets out of it. It would be good if we had someone at the borders, but most of our forces are in America.
His confidant lowered his voice. Jonas didn't have any connections in this aspect. That was why he had told Sherry to contact 129. Sherry was an important part of his plan. More importantly, he had spent great efforts cultivating her. Nothing could happen to her. Jonas looked out of the window and calmed himself down. He took out his phone to call Bessy. On the other end, Bessy's voice was extremely cold.
Hello? Bessy, you should know who I am.
Jonas paused.
You should also know what I'm looking for.
Tell me. Bessy stood at the gate and followed Kenneth and the others. Jonas didn't expect her to remain silent. His face turned cold, but his voice remained the same.
I hope you let Sherry go.
Bessy paused and said lightly,
Dream on.
Without giving him a chance to speak, she hung up. In Jonas's office, he threw his phone on the table. Jonas's eyes darkened.
I've really underestimated my son. I've underestimated Bessy. Good. Very good.
They didn't give him the slightest face.
Leave.
He tightened his grip on the cigarette. His confidant nodded and walked out without daring to raise his head. The door closed behind him. Jonas was silent for a long while before finally turning on his computer and clicking on a video. The video call was quickly picked up.
Jonas?
A slightly older voice sounded.
Are you looking for me? Mr. Schuler.
Jonas looked at the video call and sat up.
I assume you know who I'm looking for. I hope you can withdraw all your foster daughter's authority in the World Poker Tour.
Episode 501. Asserting Dominance. The World Poker Tour messed with the situation in Evanston. Whether it was in the Miller family or with regards to Sherry, the World Poker Tour was somehow involved. As long as James was still at the head, the Miller family was going to continue controlling Sherry like a puppet. Meanwhile, the White and Clark families would slowly have their turn too. As for the Flores family, Jonas didn't bother. He was greedy and ambitious. He had planned this for so many years, not just to destroy these top 4 households, but also to turn them into his puppets. Bessy was one of the most involved characters in his operation.
You're talking about my adopted daughter?
Mr. Schuler shook his head and smiled.
No, she's very important to the corporation. State your terms.
Jonas lit another cigarette. Mr. Schuler looked up at him.
If you manage to find that research result, share it.
Jonas's fingers tightened around the cigarette.
Aren't you greedy?
He'd plotted this for years, and Mr. Schuler was asking him to share it. How sly.
Then we aren't on the same page anymore,
Mr. Schuler said with a look of pity.
Of course. If you need help, I can still offer some.
Jonas's eyes darkened.
Do you know any repeat offenders who end up in jail for a second time? You mean around here?
Mr. Schuler asked.
I heard of some, but I don't have connections with them. I do know some people who are closer to them, though. Who? giant crocodile, and a few of them in Asia.
Mr. Schuler listed a few examples and then looked up again.
Giant crocodile is closest to Matthew, but both of them are hard to deal with. You won't be able to contact giant crocodile, and Matthew isn't easy to talk to. Best of luck.
The call ended, and Jonas took a deep huff. He looked at the television as he thought about something. The World Poker Tour didn't have much contact with repeat offenders. There wasn't much contact between the people around him and those over on the other side either. Jonas knitted his eyebrows together, thinking hard about how Bessy and Michael managed to know them. He got up and opened the office door.
Emergency meeting.
Sherry and the Flake family were his first pawns. With Sherry not serving her purpose well, he would have to take her out while thinking of the next person to fill in her position. The High Post staff was sitting around the meeting table.
I've named a few small households that we can have complete control over.
Back then, the Flake family had been rather unheard of in Evanston and were being trampled all over by the Miller family in no time. Jonas savored this sort of satisfaction.
Shoot.
He looked at them.
The Pete family, the Ash family, and also the Perez family.
The man smiled.
With the Flake family included, we've got all 4 households in Evanston, and all of them are under us.
Jonas took over the data file and glanced at it.
We can only look at the Ash family. The other 2. There isn't anyone really capable in the Perez family, but they are easy to handle. They surely wouldn't betray us.
Upon hearing that, Jonas tapped his fingers against the table. They were indeed easy to handle.
All right. Contact them.
Over the next few days, Jonas was busying himself with Sherry and the other 4 families. Bessy also didn't get to rest. After Mr. White's passing, she'd been tense all the time. She completed a few research studies, all the while helping the White family with their matters. She barely got to sleep these few days, nor could she fall asleep even if she had time. She returned from the Research Institute and handed a document to Norman. She then talked to Clarissa about Harvey before contacting Pete. Pete skipped a grade and was in his junior year now, but he hadn't given up on the physics competition. His age was still within the requirement. Come over to Evanston with your mother, Bessy replied. On the other end of the phone call, Pete put down his pen and looked out the window.
What's gone wrong?
Evanston was in a mess, while the high school in Chicago was relatively calm and peaceful. As for the issues in Chicago's economic center, Pete was largely unaware of them as a high school student. But Bessy was asking him to make a trip down to Evanston at such a juncture. Something must be wrong. There are some issues. Bessy applied pressure on her temple. Discuss it with my aunt tonight. It's best if you can convince her. Otherwise, I'll have to go back. It sounded pretty serious. Pete hung up after a while. He thought for a bit before going back to look for Andrea. Andrea had just returned and was busy in the kitchen. Pete mentioned what Bessy said as he helped her out.
Evanston?
Andrea stopped chopping the vegetables and looked up at him.
Pete, you should go.
Pete was stunned.
Mom?
I'm like your grandma. Even if I die, I'll only die in Chicago. Andrea turned away and continued chopping. Remember the stuff your grandma handed to you, and also the list I passed to Bessy. Ask her to keep it well. Pete was about to say something, but Andrea chased him out of the kitchen and closed the door behind him. Outside, Pete gave Luke a call. In Evanston at the villa, Bessy hung up. She turned to Michael. Has Rosemary been all right lately? Evanston had been in quite a mess recently, and the White family was seeing the effects in their business. Michael said,
I didn't ask, but she probably isn't doing so well.
Miss Miller, Michael had a conflict with Aaron. Marvin went on.
Aaron said that the boss wasn't part of the Clark family and did not deserve to go to the...
Michael glanced at him, and Marvin immediately shut up. Christopher was bringing a document over and couldn't help but pause for a moment as he overheard what he said. Marvin was so gutsy, and he hadn't been silenced by Michael yet.
Boss.
Christopher placed the document by Michael's side.
Rosemary isn't doing too well. If you still do not do anything about it.
At the same time, on Rosemary's end, she was entertaining the Pete family members.
Rosemary, we just want to have Michael conduct a checkup on Mr. Pete and also sign a document. Although we really respect Joshua, that doesn't mean that you can trample all over us.
Episode 502. Top 5 Powers in America. Rosemary had no idea when this Pete family came along. Someone was privately funding them. But Rosemary wasn't a mindless and ignorant rich girl either. She managed to figure out that the Clark and White families were following in the footsteps of the Miller family. There had never been a problem with those goods. But now, they were being held in Japan for no reason. How powerful was that person that they were able to disrupt matters in Japan? When Joshua was still around, the Clark and White families were the most powerful in the field. With such unrest happening in both families, they were more vulnerable than ever. There was an internal war within the Clark family. Rosemary looked up at the Pete family members as she heard what was said. She did not respond. This agreement was obviously against the Clark family and her corporation. If she really signed it, their authority was going to be threatened. Rosemary's hands shook.
Rosemary, if this goes on, you might not be able to get your goods back. This is worth millions of dollars, and many different families are involved. The longer you drag this out...
The Pete family tried to nudge her further. Rosemary, sign it now. Otherwise, the losses will only get greater. Two of the stakeholders urged Rosemary. The stakeholders found this upsetting as well, but there was no better option. As powerful as these 4 families might be in Evanston, they couldn't do much with Austria and Japan. Rosemary was struggling internally.
Can you be sure that the batch of goods will arrive safely? Rosemary, do you think our Pete family would be joking with you when it comes to something so important?
They looked at her. Rosemary nodded and then leaned back in her seat as she exhaled. Not considering the rest of the Clark family's involvement, she and Michael both put a lot of effort into this company. In the beginning, most of the strategic planning aspects were taught to her by Michael. This current batch of goods contained lots of medical and research apparatus. Tens of thousands of patients in the country needed these for survival. Rosemary's heart was bleeding at the thought of it.
I can agree to everything else, but not the thing about my brother's visit.
Rosemary looked up at them.
You should know his expectations and requests.
There was no choice. The Clark family was in control of the whole country's medical organizations. They had to bow down to the Pete family for this batch of goods. Rosemary thought about it a lot. Perhaps the word would keep going around that the Clark family couldn't do without Joshua, and soon they would be replaced by some other family, just like the Miller family had been. She knew that this might just be the beginning. She could compromise on all other matters, but when it came to Michael, she wouldn't give an inch. Upon hearing that, the Pete family members tilted their chins up mockingly.
Rosemary, we've long heard that your siblings are very close, and it sure seems like it's true, but we're just getting Michael to take a look at our patriarch and to diagnose any problems. It's such a small request. Surely he wouldn't reject it.
Too many people in Evanston were waiting to see Michael's downfall. This additional request was just for the Pete family to have a look at the high and mighty Michael bowing down to them.
Don't go too far.
Rosemary's eyes turned cold.
Rosemary, It seems like you aren't keen on cooperating with us.
The Pete family did not seem flustered or worried at all.
Rosemary!
Aaron slammed the table and growled.
The Clark family raised him for so many years. Can't he even fulfill the small request of giving Mr. Pete a checkup?
With that, he turned to face the Pete family and lowered his voice.
Mr. Pete, I will speak to him about this personally.
Impossible. The official seal is with me. Rosemary shook her head. The Pete family member lost his smile.
It seems like Rosemary isn't willing to cooperate with us. I guess you don't want the goods from Japan anymore either. Also, Rosemary, we're just giving you a face by calling you Rosemary. We're also being nice for not capturing Michael and taking him directly to the head of our family. Do you think the Pete family really needs to politely invite Michael now?
The moment they said that, Rosemary looked up at them. From the moment the Pete family contacted her, Rosemary already knew that they surely had a backer. She simply hadn't figured out who.
We'll give you one more day. Think about this carefully. Do you want to tell him on your own, or do we have to invite him personally?
The Pete family took the agreement and left. The door closed behind them and the atmosphere tensed further.
Rosemary.
The Clark family members and stakeholders looked at her. Rosemary raised her hand and shook her head.
Let me think about it.
A while later, she looked up at Aaron.
Since you and Michael have already fallen out with each other, don't call him anymore.
Aaron was shocked as he held his cell phone. His expression then darkened.
All right then. Rosemary, I'll see how you sort this mess out.
Aaron slammed the door and left.
Secretary Peterson, what have you found out about the Pete family's backing?
Rosemary leaned back in her seat and shut her eyes. Secretary Peterson propped up her glasses and said seriously,
I found out that it's one of the top 5 powers in America.
Rosemary's heart got a little colder. Even at their best, the Clark family was never in the same league as the top 5. No wonder they could easily stop the Clark family's goods in Japan. The next day, at the villa, Rosemary was visiting with Bessy.
Bessy, have you been well?
Rosemary asked without much expression as she entered the living room.
Are you going to take over the Research Institute? Are Director Fielder and the rest giving you pressure?
With Mr. White's passing, nobody was taking control of the Research Institute. He'd chosen Bessy before he passed on, but without his support now, her taking over the Institute? Episode 503. Your godfather will celebrate with you. Rosemary wanted to help her, but she really did not have much time or energy to spare. The Clark family was facing a huge problem right now. Rosemary turned to look at Bessy and felt that the White family was going to be in it too. After Mr. White passed on, Bessy was caught in a spot as well.
It's all fine.
Michael was busy discussing something with Christopher upstairs, so Bessy made Rosemary some tea.
Rosemary, you don't have to worry about me.
Have you guys been doing all right? She looked at Rosemary. Christopher and the rest had never hidden things from her or avoided her when discussing problems. She could also tell that the Clark family was in some sort of trouble recently. Rosemary smiled very faintly.
How much trouble could I be in? It's you, on the other hand, who's facing something huge. If you can't deal with the pressure at the Research Institute, then just back down. It's not a good place to be in. Without Mr. White around, I'm really worried about you.
Bessy naturally had a rebellious aura around her, and her beautiful eyes were filled with determination and ferocity that Rosemary had never seen before. Even her pretty face wasn't so approachable. Too much had been happening recently, and even Rosemary herself had been under pressure. She couldn't even begin to think about the impact of both the old men's passing on Bessy. She had to deal with the Research Institute and help the White family out. Bessy was usually quiet. At this point, she simply nodded towards Rosemary. She trusted that Michael could handle the Clark family issues well. "I'll be taking over in the next couple of days. Don't worry, Rosemary." Bessy's eyes got clearer and brighter as she said that. Since Principal White wanted her to take over the Research Institute and to make her grandfather proud, she would surely do it. The two of them exchanged a few more words. Not too long after, Michael came downstairs. Bessy's cell phone happened to ring at that point. She looked down and saw that it was a number from Austria, but it wasn't in her contacts. Bessy nodded towards Rosemary before going upstairs to take the call. Rosemary had something to discuss with Michael, so she did not notice Bessy's expression. It was Marvin who noticed Bessy's demeanor. He seemed a little surprised as he said,
"Miss Miller just avoided taking that phone call. The person on the other end is probably not an ordinary person,"
he said to Patrick. Patrick was still thinking about what he had just discussed with Michael and did not pay much attention to what Marvin was saying. Upstairs, Bessy only picked up the call after she'd closed the door. Her expression was a little cold, but she sounded polite as she greeted. "Godfather."
"Bessy,"
Frank said with a smile.
"I heard that you're going to take over the Research Institute in Evanston."
"Yes." Bessy stood by the window and drew the curtains. Frank smiled.
"This is important. Aren't you going to invite your godfather to come to see you? Which day will it be? I'll come over to celebrate it with you."
"You want to come here?" Bessy was taken aback. He had been overseas all this while and hadn't returned in over a decade, since he'd handed over the World Poker Tour matters to Alejandro.
"I'm not welcome?"
Frank raised a brow. "That's not it." Bessy sighed. She just felt that there was too much going on. Why were all of them coming over to Evanston, one by one? "When will you be here? I'll pick you up from the airport."
"No need for that. Your brother will help me with it. He's been here for way longer than me and knows this place well enough. Oh, right. Toby wants to come back with me too."
Frank chuckled. "Isn't he in a competition?" There was usually a competition in the spring around this time, but she had been so busy recently that she couldn't be sure of the actual schedule.
"He has his last match today. After that, he'll skip the celebration party and fly back with me instead,"
Frank said calmly. Bessy rubbed her temple. She spoke to Frank for a while more before hanging up. Too many people were coming into the picture. She thought for a bit before sending a message to Norman. "I have a few more people for the ceremony." The White family was having their emergency meeting when Norman received the message from Bessy.
"Director Fielder is already making his move. Is it appropriate to be handing the Research Institute to Miss Miller at this time?"
One of the White family members shook his head.
"We're going to get Miss Miller into trouble. Eric isn't around anymore, but the White family is."
Kenneth's eyes were colder than before.
"Everyone, remember this. Even without him around, Bessy is still the successor of the Research Institute. She's the successor we'll support. Of course, the White family supports Miss Miller, but without Mr. White around, I'm afraid something might go wrong at the ceremony,"
a senior member said in concern. With that, the meeting room went quiet. With Mr. White's passing, the people in the Research Institute might think that there was no more leadership or order in the White family. They were starting to cause problems, and disorder was about to break out. At this point, they had to introduce the new successor. All the pressure was on Bessy. Bessy initially had the Clark family as a backing too, but they had their own problems now. Without Mr. White, the only power she could depend on was the Miller family that had recently shown some potential. But to have them counter Director Fielder, they simply weren't enough. The meeting ended with everyone in low spirits. Only then did Norman show Kenneth Bessy's message.
I'll prepare what's needed for the few people on Miss Miller's end. All right, I have to trouble you to host them well,
Kenneth said before returning to the study. Norman took his leave with a heavy heart. Episode 504. Terry made it big in Japan. At the villa, Michael glanced at Rosemary and then reached for his jacket.
I haven't been to the company in 3 months. I'll go take a look at the accounts.
Michael was now standing in to do something for them. In the past, if Rosemary heard him say this, she'd surely be happy. But at this point, she couldn't bring herself to cheer up. Her emotions were a mess. But Michael was a smart man. Rosemary didn't want him to suspect anything if she came up with an excuse, so she simply said, "Sure," and sipped her tea. The tea had a light fragrance, the way Bessy usually made it. Bessy came downstairs after she ended the call. Rosemary and Michael were about to leave.
We're heading to the company. Want to come along?
Michael asked her. Bessy was still thinking about Frank's question. She couldn't tell whether he wanted to just watch what was going on in Evanston or actually get involved in it. She looked up and nodded. Michael turned back and grabbed a jacket for her. They left in 2 cars. A while later, they arrived at Rosemary's workspace.
Mr. Clark, Miss Miller.
Secretary Peterson greeted. He noticed Michael's expression and was a little shocked.
Bring this quarter's accounts over.
Rosemary glanced at him. Secretary Peterson immediately got to it.
This is my office. Bessy, it's your first time here, isn't it?
Rosemary got someone to get her a glass of milk. They sat on the black couch by the window. Michael casually placed the accounts on his lap as he flipped through the pages. He was going rather quickly. Bessy was watching him.
Want a look?
Michael looked up and asked her. Bessy shook her head and drank the milk. They talked every once in a while. Then, someone knocked on the door. It was the assistant. He stood at the door and said,
Miss Clark, Mr. Pete is here.
Rosemary got up and said clearly,
Wait for me in the meeting room. I'll be right over.
The assistant acknowledged and left. Only after that did Rosemary look towards Michael. She thought about it for a long while before finally saying,
Brother, take Bessy with you to Austria.
Bessy blinked several times and looked up at her. Rosemary?
So much has been going on lately. Both of you should take a breather in Austria. It'd be even better if you both could get a few more powers in support of the Clark family while you're there.
Rosemary seemed calm and firm as usual. The Pete family wanted Michael to go over to treat their patriarch, but it couldn't be all that simple. Michael had been so high and mighty in Evanston that many people were out to get him now. He could only be safe in Austria. Bessy frowned and was about to say something when Michael said,
Sister, go for your meeting first. I'll consider it.
That's good. Rosemary was a little relieved as she turned around and left. Her expression only darkened after she'd walked out of the door. Inside the office, Bessy tugged at his sleeve. Rosemary has something. Rosemary's thought was in line with Principal White's previously. Having experienced what went on with Principal White, Bessy was especially sensitive to the changes in the people around her.
I know.
Michael handed the accounts to her and patiently waited for her to analyze them on her own. He cupped her face and said,
I'll be out for a while. Take your time to go through it. I'll be right back.
With that, he left as well. Christopher and Patrick were waiting for him right outside. Christopher hung up and said to him,
It's Mr. Klein.
Michael nodded.
We'll go have a look first.
In the meeting room were the same group of people present as the previous day.
Today's the final deadline.
The successor of the Pete family said with a smile.
Rosemary, have you considered it? If you still haven't made up your mind, the batch of goods.
He was making things very clear. Rosemary looked up.
I can agree to everything except the one about my brother. Rosemary!
Aaron furrowed his brows. The Pete family man said coldly,
All right, it seems like you don't want these goods anymore then.
He was not done talking when, boom, someone pushed open the door. The contents of this meeting were highly confidential. The attendees were all stakeholders holding high posts in Evanston. And there was also an assistant keeping watch outside. Who could possibly come in at this point? Everyone turned towards the door instinctively. Michael looked at the people in the room and walked in slowly. Ever since Mr. Clark's passing, practically nobody had seen this false crown prince's appearance in a public setting. Everyone at the table exchanged glances. The Pete family's successor was stunned for a moment, but he soon realized that this man was no longer the arrogant and powerful Michael he once knew.
Rosemary, I see you've gotten your brother here. In that case, we can sign the agreement now.
The Pete family man sat back down.
What agreement?
Michael stopped at the empty seat beside Rosemary, but did not take a seat. He simply held the agreement and took a look at it. It wasn't much, and he was done reading it pretty quickly.
What are you doing here?
Rosemary remembered how they'd threatened to lay a finger on Michael the previous day.
Leave. I'll explain this to you in detail another day.
When Michael was done looking through it, he slowly crushed the papers into a ball and tossed it into the trash bin, not too far away.
We're not signing it. Scram.
The Pete family successor expected to see Michael bow down to them, but who would have expected such an attitude from him? His facial muscles spasmed as he clenched his jaw in anger.
Good. Very well. Michael, don't blame us for being merciless then.
Michael looked at him calmly and raised a brow.
As you wish.
The Pete family members left in a fit.
You.
Aaron glared at him. Only the Clark family members and a few other staff were left in the meeting room.
Brother, get a ticket and go to Austria as soon as you can.
Rosemary tapped on her cell phone.
Forget it. I'll get the tickets for you and Bessy.
Michael grabbed her cell phone.
No need.
Aaron smirked.
Michael, the Pete family is already threatening the Clark family. Do you know who's backing them? It's one of the top 5 in America. And you still think you're the prince of the Clark family. Dream on.
Rosemary shook her head. Even at their peak, the Clark family was nobody to the top 5 forces. Not to mention the state they were in right now, she said.
Brother, take Bessy with you and head to Austria now. I'll settle the Pete family.
Michael glanced at her.
Don't worry, I'll settle it. You? The Clark family's goods are being held in Japan. Without the medicine and resources, the hospitals under us will be facing a shortage. How are you going to settle that?
Aaron spat. He had so much pent-up anger towards Michael. Rosemary was getting anxious.
Brother.
Michael turned to Christopher and asked.
Is Terry in Japan yet?
Yes. Christopher smiled and gave Terry a video call. He turned to Rosemary and said,
Rosemary, Terry made it big in Japan. Who took over your goods? Matthew, the terrorist groups, or some hired soldiers?
At that point, the video call went through. Episode 505. Cleanse the Family. Christopher was right. Michael's business was in Japan. The business wasn't too legal. Terry was rather fierce himself and often traveled around to resell things back in Japan. He dealt with people like Giant Crocodile, terrorist groups, and other threatening forces. Christopher and Terry weren't quite on the same page. Christopher spent more of his time in Austria with Alexander, But Christopher was very clear about what Terry dealt with on a daily basis. Christopher was still talking. His cell phone lit up and Terry's face could be seen on the screen. Terry seemed to be standing by the roadside and talking to a local in their native language. Seeing that the call had connected, he turned to his cell phone and greeted politely.
"Boss,"
Christopher asked him,
"have you found out what's going on with Rosemary's goods?" "It's not the terrorist groups. I worked with them before and just asked them about it."
Terry's voice was a little muffled due to the poor connection, but they could figure out what he was saying.
"It's a hired group. This group hasn't robbed our goods in a long while. I'm currently negotiating with them."
Terry thought about something for a while and then mumbled,
"We can't really be thinking about opening a barbecue store."
Compared to the war zone that was Austria, Japan was rather peaceful. The situation between Rosemary and the Pete family seemed so dire here, but on Terry's side, they were simply negotiating.
"Is Rosemary around?"
Terry asked. Christopher nodded.
"Yes."
He turned the camera to Rosemary. Terry said,
"Rosemary, are the goods especially urgent? There are some standard protocols to follow, so it'll take another 2 days or so before we can send them to Evanston by air."
There were indeed a lot of administration matters to settle in order to send medical goods over. 2 days was already the fastest they could go. The Pete family's guarantee to Rosemary was 7 days. Compared to that, 2 days was Godspeed. Rosemary had met Terry only a few times and remembered only his more outstanding features. Upon hearing what he said, she was stunned for a moment. She then responded,
"Of course, that's all right." "I'll get to it then,"
Terry said a bit more before hanging up. The others in the meeting room did not have much of a reaction. Rosemary had been to Austria before and knew some of the powers there. She knew who Matthew was, but she wasn't so aware of the hired groups or the terrorists. However, she could deduce that they were just like Matthew, not simple. Aaron and the other stakeholders traveled often too, but they didn't know much about the elite forces in Japan. What were the terrorist groups like? They'd heard of hired groups before, but they had no idea what this organization was like. Meanwhile, they knew of Matthew and were clear that they couldn't afford to offend him. The 3 terms that Christopher mentioned so casually were extremely unfamiliar to them.
"Get someone to receive the goods 2 days from now,"
Michael said to everyone respectfully.
"I've gone through the accounts. You can carry on with the meeting, but I have something else to attend to. I'll get Christopher to stay behind to assist you."
With that, he left the meeting room and closed the door gently. Michael did not head straight to the office. Bessy was still going through the documents. Upon hearing sounds, she looked up at him. "You got it all settled?"
"Mm-hmm."
Michael nodded casually.
"Let's head back. Don't you have something to discuss with Norman?"
Bessy put the accounts down. With Michael bringing this up, she thought about Frank again. "The ceremony is 3 days from now."
"I'll get Terry over too?"
Michael asked. "No." Bessy rubbed her temple. "Don't get all of them back. There were enough people and problems as of yet." With the slender figure disappearing behind the door, the people in the meeting room slowly processed what was going on. Rosemary turned to them and coldly said,
"Nobody is to talk about what happened here to anyone else. You are..."
Aaron furrowed his brows.
"Fishing."
Rosemary turned away.
"It's about time we cleaned up the Clark family and the related families."
The stakeholders turned to Aaron, then to Rosemary. They had all gone quiet. So much was going on in their minds. The security guard of the Clark family had stayed in Austria for 2 weeks, and he hadn't even managed to get close to Matthew's forces. But Michael and Terry? Aaron and the stakeholders could tell that Michael and the rest were actually close to that group of people.
"Rosemary, Michael, What exactly does he do?
Someone finally asked after moments of silence passed. Aaron seemed expressionless, but deep down he was anxious for the answer as well. Rosemary had no idea what exactly Michael was involved in. All she knew was that he hadn't taken a cent from the family ever since he turned 12, and yet he seemed to have a never-ending supply of money. Episode 506. Factions. Rosemary shook her head. She wasn't sure how he got self-sufficient, but it didn't change her decision. The top 4 households in Evanston had met with problems recently. Everyone knew that there was a huge power that wanted to reshuffle and outdo the top 4 households. The Miller family in the past was a classic example. In fact, a lot of people in Evanston were shaken by the passing of the 2 patriarchs. Now, there was another piece of groundbreaking news. The medical apparatus, as well as the medication needed in hospitals under the Clark family, were being held in another country. With that, the stock prices for the Clark family business plummeted. It went down for 2 days in a row. The news shocked the city. Who would have expected such a thing to happen the moment Joshua passed on? Besides the White family, Miller family, Soup family, and Bright family supporting the Clark family, the rest were just enjoying the show. There were rumors that the top 4 families wouldn't be able to retain their places. With that, many people holding on to those stocks sold them quickly, for fear that they would become worthless shortly. The Clark family wasn't the least bit worried, however, which came as a surprise to some people. One of the Clark family's security guards even flew to Austria for business, and it didn't seem as if the Clark family was in trouble at all. People were beginning to take sides in Evanston. In the Bright family's house, because of Brandon's relationship with Michael, Samuel had a huge influence on the Bright family. The Bright family was calling for an emergency meeting as well. News regarding the Clark family was no longer a secret. Everyone knew that a power that could hold the Clark family's goods overseas was surely too strong for a family like the Brights to deal with. The Bright family decided to protect themselves first. Samuel opened the door and entered, taking the first empty seat he saw.
As the next heir of the Bright family, my stance is very straightforward. The Bright family will choose to support the Clark family at any point in time. Anyone who isn't willing can start another business outside the Bright family. Are you going to drag down the entire Bright family with you?
Someone stood up and asked sternly the moment Samuel said that. Samuel turned to the man who had just spoken.
Uncle, if you disagree, you can back out.
The meeting room went quiet. A moment later, Samuel's uncle stood up.
I'll back out, all right. I'll see how long more of you can keep the Bright family going.
He slammed the door and left. After he'd left, Samuel turned to look at the rest of the people in the meeting room. The stud in his left ear glinted as he asked,
Anyone else wants to back out?
A few other people stood up and left. Samuel had been texting Bessy the whole time, asking if she was doing all right in the Clark family. Rosemary kept the news quiet. Samuel didn't know what was going on in the Clark family, but he'd chosen the side to take. This could be happening in the Soup family and other families at this point as well. The majority might be choosing not to join this camp. The Pete family waited for 2 days, but the Clark family did not come to beg them. The Pete family's successor had been so confident before, but he was starting to get flustered now, especially at the thought of Michael's reaction that day. He asked Chairman Pete,
Chairman Pete, could something have gone wrong? I got someone to keep an eye on the Clark family and nothing seems amiss. They're going ahead with the news conference today. According to the Clark family, the goods have already arrived. The Clark family is one of the largest households after all. Maybe we should stop insisting that Michael come over to check on the old man."
The successor was getting worried now. If it wasn't for Jonas, they wouldn't even have had the chance to meet Rosemary. The Clark family's attitude was completely out of their expectations. Chairman Pete shook his head as he held his teacup. He smiled.
"Rosemary is always like that. She's just feigning calmness, and that's the only representative we see from the Clark family. Mr. Klein is personally involved in this, so it can't be wrong. Just wait and see how the Clark family will deal with things today. It's about time someone took their place."
The goods had arrived? Were they daydreaming? Chairman Pete reached for the remote control. The television was turned on at Rosemary's live stream. Rosemary didn't appear down and out as Chairman Pete had expected. On the contrary, she seemed rather energized. She was sitting upright and her voice was crystal clear.
"The newly developed medicine has been distributed to the different hospitals in the counties and cities. They will—"
Bam! Chairman Pete's teacup landed on the floor. His smile stiffened.
"Chairman Pete? The Clark family."
The Pete family's successor felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at his expression. Chairman Pete had been so confident just a moment ago, but he'd lost it. He turned pale as he fell back in his seat in disbelief.
"How could this have happened? That's Mr. Klein."
If the Clark family was this powerful, how could they not have made a successful entrance in Austria? The Pete family's successor already felt something was wrong earlier on. The news now was just confirming his doubts. He grabbed his hair.
"Chairman Pete, I'd already said that we shouldn't be too harsh on the Clark family. We can't force it on Michael as he might not be that simple. What do we do now? How are we going to clean this up?"
After this news conference, the Pete family was going down in Evanston. If Jonas was going to look out for the Pete family, they might still be all right. But if he chose to wash his hands of them, then they'd be gone for good. It wasn't just the Pete family who was caught by surprise. Many others were as well, but none of them managed to find out anything about the situation. At the villa, Rosemary came over right after the news conference. She and Aaron had put aside their differences temporarily and had been working on the Clark family matters together in these couple of days. After working so hard on this matter, she finally had some time to breathe.
"Bessy."
Rosemary looked at Bessy and put her teacup down when she recalled something.
"Is it time for the ceremony already on the White family's side?"
Bessy nodded.
"Tomorrow."
Episode 507. I'm looking for Miss Miller.
"So fast?"
Rosemary took a sip of tea and furrowed her brows. She knew that with Mr. White's passing, the White family and the Research Institute would be lost, just as the Clark family was now. With Bessy taking over the position now and without authorities like Joshua and Mr. White to support her, there was something going on in the Research Institute. Bessy looked up at her. Norman set the date. Rosemary nodded and tapped her fingers against the table. She was thinking if there was anyone in her connections whose presence might stabilize the situation on that day. But the only people she could think of were two people from the medical lab.
"Who is the White family inviting for the ceremony?"
Rosemary asked. Bessy paused for a moment before saying, "Not sure, but I have two friends coming from overseas." Rosemary looked towards Michael as she thought about someone she could contact.
"Brother, could you invite Ray and the head of the museum over on that day?"
Bessy looked up when she heard Ray's name. She recalled that the workbooks Michael had given her earlier were in Ray's handwriting. Her handwriting was about 30% similar to his at this point. Michael was sitting beside Bessy and working on the laptop. He seemed to be deep in thought as he asked,
"Invite them?"
He appeared to be considering it seriously.
"No need."
Bessy turned to him. "Please don't invite them."
"Why not?"
Christopher asked as he walked over.
Miss Miller, you need to let the group of people in the Research Institute know that you've got backing."
Bessy put her hand to her forehead. "I already have guests, a few of them."
"Guests?"
Michael turned to her in apparent shock. Too much had happened in the last few days, and neither of them had properly processed it. Even when they were together, they were both dealing with their own issues. He was only hearing about the handover ceremony today. Maybe not guests. Bessy leaned back in her seat. "My godfather."
"Godfather?"
Not only was Michael shocked, but Rosemary, Marvin, and Christopher were as well. Michael shut his laptop and turned to her.
"Bessy, you have a godfather?"
"I've barely met him, but my grandpa told me about him since I was young." Bessy looked down at her cell phone as Giant Crocodile's notification came in. She was reading the message as she went on. "He lives abroad and this is the first time he'll be coming back."
"When is he arriving?"
Michael understood Bessy well enough to know that given her current attitude, it showed that she really respected her godfather. He got a little serious. Rosemary put aside the Research Institute matters as well.
"This is the first time in Evanston? Brother, you've got to be a good host."
"He'll be here tonight, and someone will be there to pick him up. You'll be able to see him tomorrow at the ceremony." Bessy shook her head.
"Sure."
Michael nodded and did not mention picking him up again. Bessy thought for a bit and stood up. "I'll make a call." Michael said quietly,
"Go ahead."
Bessy went upstairs and returned Giant Crocodile's call.
"Want to drink tonight?"
Giant Crocodile asked in less than fluent English.
"Clarissa is reserving the whole place."
"It's all right, I've got something going on tomorrow." Bessy sat by her laptop. "I'll look for you guys when I'm done." The 5 people of 129 had never met with perfect attendance before.
"It's the ceremony Jared was talking about, right?"
Giant Crocodile heard about it too.
"All right, use Lynn as much as you need."
They hung up. Giant Crocodile turned towards Jared and Clarissa.
"She has a ceremony to attend."
Jared nodded.
"I guessed so. Moreover, Mr. White's death is a big deal. It seems to have had quite a huge impact on her." "The ceremony?"
Giant Crocodile seemed to be thinking about something.
"She seems to be into antique stuff. I got her another 2 good items again."
After the last time, Giant Crocodile went to the source for more items for Bessy. He'd brought them along to Evanston with him, but he hadn't got the chance to see Bessy yet. Clarissa put down yet another empty glass. "I got her a huge gift, too." Seeing that they seemed prepared, Jared said,
"What are you guys getting involved for?"
Giant Crocodile glanced at him.
"Have you checked out the group that does resales in Japan? He's a boss with a proper business, and you call that resales? They're still in Japan. You guys don't have to call to check on them again."
Jared took a spoonful of food.
"You're not as useful as my girl."
Giant Crocodile furrowed his brows, but after the previous time, Bessy hadn't helped him go against that resale group.
"I'll go look for her myself and pass her the gifts."
After eating, Giant Crocodile asked Lynn for Bessy's current address and then headed out to look for her. At the villa, Rosemary was discussing Bessy and the Research Institute with Michael. A while later, Terry entered, calling out,
"Boss, I'm back."
He still had his full beard and was holding a laptop in his hand. He greeted,
"Rosemary."
Because of what had happened 2 days ago, Rosemary immediately stood up when she saw him. She politely said,
"Terry, thank you so much for settling the goods." "Don't be so civil. We're all family. He came back with your goods this time."
Michael opened his laptop again and then said to Terry,
"Take a seat."
Terry sat on the couch right away.
"Rosemary, you don't have to thank me. Just say the word and I'll get it done. No fuss."
At this point, someone else entered. It was a housemaid. "Michael, someone's here looking for Miss Miller." Episode 508. I'm not trying to scare you. but it might be Matthew. Bessy had many friends in the capital. Currently, they were discussing the Research Institute. Initially, Michael was talking about the Research Institute with Rosemary, but after hearing the maid's words, he thought about it and felt that this person was likely to be from the White family.
Norman?
Michael looked at the door and stood up. The people in the manor were all Michael's confidants and were naturally familiar with the people from powerful families. Hearing this, he shook his head.
No, it seems to be a foreigner.
Foreigner? Michael paused. He thought about Bessy's affairs and sighed slightly. In addition to thinking about Bessy's handover ceremony tomorrow, Rosemary was also thinking about Terry's problems in Japan. She wanted to ask what exactly Terry was doing, but it didn't seem like a good time to ask this question, and she only looked at the door.
If it's not Norman and the others, who else will look for us at this time? I don't know.
Michael picked up his teacup and said to the servant,
Ask him to come in.
Michael was also unsure of who it was. The servant nodded and quickly went out. Marvin stood behind Terry. When he heard what the servant told Michael, he was taken aback. He was deep in thought. Christopher, who was beside him, glanced at him and asked,
What's wrong? I was thinking, could that be the person from the barbecue? Besides, Terry just looked for him recently.
Marvin made a brave statement.
I'm not trying to scare you, but could it be Matthew?
Marvin had never seen any normal person look for Bessy. Christopher had obviously heard of Bessy's influence, but after hearing what Marvin said, he didn't respond immediately and thought about that possibility. After all, in Austria, Matthew captured those people and respectfully sent her back. If it really was Matthew, it would be terrifying. After listening to the conversation between the two, Terry glanced at them from the sofa.
Marvin, what's going on? Calculate the probability of the two of them returning to Evanston in these 2 days. Why are they looking for Miss Miller?
Marvin glanced at him. He didn't respond and just said,
I will ask Miss Miller to come down.
Rosemary lowered her head, took a sip of her tea and listened to the few of them talk about Matthew casually. She recognized Matthew's name and couldn't help but ask,
The one at the barbecue was the boss of the mercenary group who robbed your goods. In the past, he helped Miss Miller roast meat at a barbecue once.
Christopher calmly explained.
Actually, Terry could contact him so quickly this time because Miss Miller knew his contact details.
Rosemary was speechless. Once Christopher said that, she couldn't help but put Bessy on a pedestal, and she even felt that Marvin's conjecture was right. Could it really be that the legendary boss of the mercenary group? Thinking about it, Rosemary put down her teacup and looked at the door.
I will get a glass of water.
Terry couldn't be bothered to talk to the two of them. The mercenary leader was handling big business in Japan. He couldn't be here now. He took his glass and went to the kitchen to get some water. At the same time, outside, the servant brought a large and tall man inside. The man had an exotic appearance. His eyes were slightly blue, and his facial features were extremely distinct. His eyebrows were thick and unique. Most people wouldn't forget his looks. He held a delicate black box with gold rims in his hand. His face was nonchalant, but his eyes were rather intimidating.
Hello, I'm looking for Bessy. Is she here?
Giant Crocodile glanced around but didn't see Bessy. Michael looked at Giant Crocodile and paused for a while before saying,
She's still upstairs. She'll be down soon.
After hearing Marvin say that someone was looking for her, Bessy was a little surprised. She didn't think that anyone would look for her at this time. Could it be Frank? Bessy put on her jacket, turned off her computer, and went downstairs with him. Marvin quickly followed behind her. Downstairs, Bessy immediately saw that Giant Crocodile was about to climb up the stairs. She was speechless. Why did you come over? Bessy pressed her temple.
To ask you some things and congratulate you,
Giant Crocodile said coldly and concisely. Bessy looked around and introduced him to Michael and the others. This is Xander Cree, my internet friend. Rosemary looked at Giant Crocodile and remembered that she had met him for a brief moment at the bad coffee shop in Austria. Her memory was good, and she immediately remembered who he was because of his uniqueness. She smiled gently.
So, you're Bessy's friend.
Giant Crocodile didn't remember Rosemary, but since she addressed Bessy informally, he politely nodded at her. Michael stretched his hand out to Giant Crocodile, raised his eyebrows slightly, and said slowly,
I've heard so much about you, Mr. Cree.
Giant Crocodile glanced at him.
Same here.
There seemed to be some tension. Bessy had a slight headache as she looked at Giant Crocodile. Since he looked for her, it was definitely not about serious business.
I'll take him upstairs to talk.
Michael nodded.
Go ahead.
The two of them went upstairs together. Marvin, who came downstairs with Bessy, glanced at Giant Crocodile several times. He didn't seem like the mercenary boss he was familiar with, nor was he Matthew, who sent them back to the capital. Marvin was slightly disappointed. It turned out to be different from what he expected. He really looked like her internet friend. He sighed slightly. At the same time, Terry walked out of the kitchen with a glass of water in his hand. He only saw a figure on the stairs that seemed familiar. However, he didn't think too much about it and only glanced at Marvin with a slight smile.
So, is it the mercenary boss? Or is it Matthew?
Episode 509. Are any of Bessy's friends normal? Marvin didn't respond. Christopher smiled.
It seems like it's Miss Miller's internet friend.
Terry wanted to say that the person's back view was familiar, but after hearing that, he didn't comment further. Upstairs, Bessy brought Giant Crocodile into the study, took the gift box from him and asked, Why did you come here today?
It's about the situation we talked about.
Giant Crocodile glanced at her. I really can't do that. Terry and Giant Crocodile were both begging her to help them with the same situation. It was too difficult. These two already had a complicated relationship with conflicting interests, and their backings were very powerful. Bessy didn't want to interfere in the transactions among them. But Giant Crocodile really couldn't find anyone to help with Alexander's attack. Thinking about it, she said, How about this? I can help you find someone skilled in computing.
Okay.
Although Giant Crocodile felt that it was a pity, he trusted her since she said that the person was capable. He agreed to compromise.
I will analyze the situation in Evanston with Jared for you. You can continue to use Lynn. I won't go back for the time being.
Giant Crocodile sat on an empty chair.
There are also other reasons for Mr. White's death.
I know. Bessy played with her gift. Another rare mechanism box. She didn't look up. I'm still thinking about it.
As long as you're aware.
Giant Crocodile did not say anything further. The two of them chatted for a while more before Bessy said to him, Forget it. Let's go downstairs. She initially wanted Giant Crocodile to jump down from the second floor, but she gave up on that idea.
Is the person you're going to send me from the Hacker Alliance?
Giant Crocodile remembered that even though Bessy wasn't a member of the Hacker Alliance, she had some relations with it. Yes. Bessy opened the door and went downstairs with him. They've participated in 2 Black Hat conferences. They can help you. Terry was having a conversation with Rosemary and the others on the sofa when he heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. He drank a mouthful of water and casually glanced at the stairs. Cough. He immediately choked.
Are you okay?
Marvin put down his game console and glanced at him. Terry looked up emotionlessly.
Is that Miss Miller's internet friend? Yes, he's Mr. Cree. He met Bessy in Austria before.
Terry's overreaction caused everyone to stare at him.
What's wrong?
Terry did not respond. Initially, when Terry walked out of the kitchen, he felt that the figure at the stairs was very familiar. However, when Marvin said that it was Bessy's internet friend, Terry ignored his suspicions. Besides, Giant Crocodile looked cold and arrogant, unlike a typical person on the internet. Giant Crocodile was a mysterious person. 129 hid his information very well, but since Terry had many conflicts with him, he was considered his opponent. So how could he not be aware of what Giant Crocodile looked like? Seeing the tall man beside Bessy, Terry stood up haphazardly. His reaction was a little too big. Giant Crocodile said something to Bessy before looking over casually and seeing Terry. Giant Crocodile squinted and looked at him alarmingly.
Why are you here?
Terry gritted his teeth.
Are you Miss Miller's internet friend?
Giant Crocodile didn't know that this was how Bessy introduced him to the others. However, it wasn't wrong to call him an internet friend. He quickly made sense of it. In the past, he didn't understand why Bessy kept rejecting him. But now, he finally understood. He looked at Terry, but neither of them said a thing. Giant Crocodile turned to Bessy and coughed. She said, "You should go."
Okay.
Giant Crocodile paused, but went with her suggestion. Everyone in the hall said goodbye to him before he left. Marvin even respectfully walked him out.
Terry?
When Giant Crocodile left, everyone in the room hadn't reacted yet, but Christopher glanced at Terry. Besides Christopher, Rosemary also felt that Terry's reaction was strange. She looked at him in confusion.
Do you know Mr. Cree? My old nemesis, Giant Crocodile. Do you think I wouldn't be able to recognize him?
Terry pinched his fingers. When Marvin heard this after walking Giant Crocodile out, he paused in his footsteps. After that, Terry looked at Michael.
Boss, I'm going out for a while.
Michael was still busy typing something on the laptop on his lap. He didn't look up, but said calmly,
Go, but don't make any trouble.
Terry acknowledged him and left. No one else spoke in the hall. About a minute later, Rosemary said quietly,
Christopher, did you hear what Terry said just now? I suspect that there's a problem with my ears. He said that Xander Cree is Giant Crocodile.
Michael looked up at Bessy before replying to her.
So it turns out that he's Giant Crocodile, one of the 5 senior members of 129. He's quite young.
Rosemary finished the tea remaining in her cup. After saying that, she didn't think anything more. Beside her, Christopher was also expressionless. Besides Bessy and Michael, only Marvin appeared calm. He was a little surprised. No wonder he felt that something was wrong. Since he met Bessy, he had never seen a normal person around her. Sure enough, Miss Miller didn't disappoint him.
It turned out to be Giant Crocodile.
Marvin's voice was quite calm. It was so calm that Rosemary, Patrick, and Christopher couldn't help but stare at him. How could you say that so calmly? After Marvin finished speaking, he turned to look at Bessy and asked bravely,
Miss Miller, how did you become internet friends with Giant Crocodile? Aren't Giant Crocodile's friends the senior members of 129?
After hearing that, Michael suddenly stopped typing. Episode 510. What do the senior members of 129 do every day? They drink. Michael raised his head to look at Bessy with a misty look in his eyes. Rosemary and the others also looked at her in anticipation. In the past, I helped him once and hid his ID. Bessy narrowed her eyes and said vaguely, I'm heading to bed. Tomorrow I have to attend the ceremony.
Oh.
Marvin nodded.
It seems that Giant Crocodile also uses the internet.
He could understand Toby. As for Giant Crocodile, do all important people use the internet? The others in the hall did not say anything and were very silent. Even Michael seemed to be thinking about something. After some time, Rosemary let out a sigh.
No wonder Giant Crocodile accepted my order that time. It was probably Bessy's doing, right?
She just felt that it was strange that Giant Crocodile, one of the 5 senior members of 129, would accept her order. However, that was Giant Crocodile from 129. Rosemary was a little in awe. She didn't think much about her knowing Michael and Terry, but how could Bessy know Giant Crocodile? Bessy really gave her a huge surprise. If it was Sherry, who was well known in Evanston, this would have been publicized a long time ago. The next day came, and it was the day of the succession ceremony of the Research Institute. Bessy woke up very early. Rosemary didn't leave last night because she remembered that today was Bessy's ceremony.
Miss Miller, if you invite Giant Crocodile over.
Marvin took a bite of bread at the breakfast table.
I guarantee that those people in the Research Institute won't dare to say a thing. That's too exaggerated.
Michael drank a glass of water and said faintly,
Giant Crocodile is not a suitable attendee.
If he appeared in public, the Capitol might not be able to handle it. Giant Crocodile's identity was sensitive and his whereabouts was always well hidden. It didn't make sense for him to appear on this occasion.
Okay.
Marvin nodded regretfully. He then looked at Bessy.
Miss Miller, since you're familiar with Giant Crocodile, has he ever said anything about the internal affairs of 129? For example, is Lone Wolf male or female? Or what do the senior members do every day?
They drink, Bessy suddenly said. Marvin was confused. I said that they probably drink every day. Bessy rephrased. After eating, they went to the Research Institute. Today, the Research Institute was opened to the public. When Bessy arrived, Norman and Kenneth were already there. The succession ceremony was held in the auditorium.
Miss Miller, this is the schedule.
Norman greeted Michael and the rest before handing a schedule to her. Bessy glanced at it. The ceremony would start at 9 a.m. At that time, Director Fielder would hand her the official seal. After Mr. White died, the Research Institute was temporarily handed over to Director Fielder. When he saw Bessy looking at her watch, Norman said,
Miss Miller, today's handover won't be peaceful. If you want to back out, the White family will understand.
Bessy acknowledged him casually. A senior member of the White family also said solemnly,
Since the old man is dead, there won't be anyone to help you now. There will be many accidents in the future, and the people of the Research Institute will sail with the wind. However, the White family will only support you.
Recently, the White family was in a mess, and without strong backing, it was difficult to stabilize Bessy as the person in charge. Don't worry. Bessy patted the senior member's shoulder. Norman nodded. He couldn't help but admit that Mr. White chose the right person.
Oh yes, Miss Miller, have the guests you mentioned arrived? They didn't register at the concierge.
Bessy glanced at the time on her phone. Just ignore them. They're only here to join in the commotion. Frank would definitely not arrive so early.
All right.
Norman nodded.
I will let the others know.
The succession ceremony started. Many people attended today's handover ceremony. The senior management of the Research Institute and the White family representatives had all arrived. Many incidents had occurred in the Capitol recently. Many families suddenly appeared and their collaboration became more obvious. The handover ceremony began at 9 a.m. Norman stood on the stage and said a few pleasantries before inviting Bessy and Director Fielder out.
Now, Director Fielder will present the official seal to Miss Miller.
Norman stepped aside. Bessy was standing proudly. She glanced at Director Fielder wearing a suit and politely said, "Director Fielder." Director Fielder ignored her. His voice was a little hoarse as usual, and he wasn't holding the seal. He only stared at Norman.
"Norman, Bessy is still too young to take up this position. The Research Institute management decided that I will take charge for now."
Norman's expression changed. He initially thought that Director Fielder would at least put up a performance and did not expect him to be so direct. When Mr. White and Mr. Clark were alive and Michael was still Michael, Director Fielder had his doubts, but now he didn't even have to pretend anymore.
"Brother,"
Rosemary sat in the first row of the auditorium, frowning.
"Did you invite the person I told you to invite?"
Michael continued to look at Bessy.
"Yes."
Rosemary nodded solemnly.
"I still don't think it's enough. Director Fielder is not afraid at all and is obviously bullying Bessy."
Michael tapped his fingers on the armrest emotionlessly. His expression turned dark. On the stage, Norman was also upset, but held back his anger.
"Director Fielder, when do you think it will be appropriate then?" "When Bessy becomes a level 1 researcher, I will naturally hand over the seal to her."
Director Fielder said neither humbly nor overbearingly.
"Seeing the White family's condition now, Bessy won't be able to manage the Research Institute properly. Tell me, who can she keep under control?"
This sentence made Norman, the White family, Rosemary, and the others furious. To become a level 1 researcher, one needed credentials, and it wasn't easy to achieve that in a few years. After a few years, who knew who would be in charge of the Research Institute? Director Fielder looked at Bessy and smiled.
"If you don't believe me, you can ask the manager of the Research Institute below. They agreed to this together."
He reached out and took a few sheets of paper out from his pocket. He unfolded them. Below the stage, the representatives of the 4 major families weren't surprised at all. The White and Clark families were unstable. With only the Miller family backing Bessy, it wasn't strange that she ran into trouble with Director Fielder. Norman pursed his lips. He looked at the second row where the management of the Research Institute was seated. They all lowered their heads and did not dare to look at him. Bessy took the papers from Director Fielder, looked at them, and tore them in half. She narrowed her eyes and maintained her usual arrogance. Director Fielder looked up in disbelief.
"How dare you?"
Bessy looked at him and smiled lightly. "Do you really think that I will compromise just because Mr. White is dead?"
"No. I think that you don't want to stay in the Research Institute anymore."
Director Fielder smiled. At this time, a thick voice was heard at the doorway.
"How exciting."